Sort of. Boys and girls, you can head down to junior church if you'd like to be dismissed. The rest of us, you know where to turn because of that song, right? Book of Isaiah, chapter 40. Isaiah, chapter 40. I was planning just to continue on in our series on the peace of God, but I decided to take just a little break this morning. It is Mother's Day. I trust this message will be an encouragement to all of us. I trust it'll be especially an encouragement to our mothers. But as an added bonus, it does tie into our series on the peace of God, too. So I think we're going to cover all the bases today, Lord willing, and that's our goal. As we begin, let me ask you a question. When you think of strength in regards to your parents, who comes to mind first? Somewhat of a loaded question, a little bit, and the answer may depend on the type of family you grew up in. But I hope as you think about this, your answer would be both. Both strong, but strong in different ways, right? There's a difference, and there's different kinds of strength. You know, God has defined unique roles for men and for women, and He's specifically created us to fulfill those roles. I think we understand that. Man is to be masculine. He's created by God to lead and to provide and to protect. And so God has wired him that way. He's given him physical strength. He's given him a drive to compete, a drive to succeed. And that's kind of what gets us out of bed every morning and going to work, sometimes to a job that we don't really enjoy. But we have that drive and that competitive edge. God's created us that way. The woman is designed and created to be feminine, created by God to bear and nurture and care for children, given an incredible ability to multitask. Guys, are you amazed sometimes by your wife and the ability she has to juggle all these balls and keep them all up at the same time? God's equipped her for that task marvelously. She too is strong, but it's a different kind of strength. It's an inner strength, a profound, often quiet strength, characterized by a deep resilience, selfless sacrifice, tireless exertion, and even fierce protection, right? We know the adage, no one messes with Mama Bear, right? I was going to take some time this morning and just allow us to kind of freewheel and throw out a one-word description of your mom. As you think about your mother, what one word would come to mind? But I think for sake of time, I'm not going to do that. But I would encourage you to think that through. And then if you're able to call her and tell her yourself, praise the Lord, do it. If you can't, I understand. That's why I'm not parking on some of these things today. I've had a lot of people tell me that while their dad was strong, even a pillar of strength, it was mom that truly held the family together. I think many of us probably could agree with that. I was blessed to grow up in a family with that kind of a mom that was incredibly strong, incredibly resilient, a mom that never sat down. You guys, Thanksgiving dinner, I don't think mom or grandma ever sat down until the meal was almost done. That's just the way they rolled. They were always serving, always busy, always working. I saw the same thing in my grandparents, my grandmothers. I see the same thing in my mother-in-law. For the past 33 years, I see those same characteristics in my wife. I've been blessed to be around 5 godly women, strong godly women. But you know, human strength has its limits, doesn't it? Even mothers get tired. Even their strength will fail over time. Whether you're working a demanding job or you're laboring to keep the household together, or maybe because of life circumstances you're doing both, there'll be times when we just get exhausted. There'll be times where our strength runs out, when we feel like we just can't go on any further. I saw a news story many years ago that I think illustrates that point. It was a 12-year-old girl who'd gone to an amusement park with her family, and she was riding this giant Ferris wheel called Old Eli. I don't know why I remember the name, but Old Eli, huge Ferris wheel, towered above all the other rides there in the park. And she was excited, and she was riding that ride, and just as her little car crested the top and started to come down, something happened, and she slipped, and she fell out of that car. And she began to plummet down towards the ground, smashing herself against the steel supports, and you stopped breathing as you were watching that, just for that moment. Just as it looked like she would surely fall to her death, her leg caught in the V where 2 support cables came together, and she's dangling there by that one leg, caught right behind her knee. Somehow she managed to have the strength to reach up and grab a hold of that cable with her one arm. And she held on there, clinging to life by one leg and a broken arm, holding on with every ounce of strength that she had left in her. I preached this message one time and used that illustration, and I forgot to give the end of the story. So everybody was like sitting there the whole time like, well, what happened to the girl? They never heard the rest of the message. So I'm gonna remedy that today. Rescue workers did get up there quickly, and they were able to secure her and lower her down to the ground. She got medical support, and she was okay. But have there ever been times in your life where you felt like that little girl? Perhaps it was an extended illness or a physical struggle. Maybe you were caring for somebody that was in that type of a condition, and it just kept going and going. Extra responsibilities at work or pressures coming from places that you really didn't expect them to come. Maybe it's just the daily hectic routine of life with kids and with work, and then the kids get sick, and then one thing after another, and you just find yourself exhausted. The days are long, and the breaks are non-existent. As you know, motherhood, fatherhood, that's not a 9-to-5 job. There's no clocking out. And it wears you down. Have you ever felt like you too were hanging precariously by one leg and a broken arm, just barely holding on? It's times like this that we need strength from an outside source because our own strength is insufficient. And it doesn't matter if that need is physical during a particularly busy time. It doesn't matter if it's emotional during a time of grief. It doesn't matter if it's spiritual during an all-out attack by the enemy. The source of our strength is the same. We need God's strength. Oh, not just to hold on for dear life, but also to emerge victorious on the other side of it. And God's strength will allow that to happen. You're in Isaiah chapter 40. And let's just read a couple of these verses here. I'd like to read the whole chapter. I'd encourage you to go back and do that later. But let's just pick it up in verse 28. Notice what the prophet says. Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He gives power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary. The young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And I love the last line of that song, that prayer, teach me, Lord, to wait so that I can have this strength, supernatural strength given to a needy people by an infinitely powerful God. We see in this passage a conditional promise based on God's character and given to God's people. Wait on the Lord. He'll renew your strength. I wait, he renews. God makes a solitary demand, but he promises a specific demonstration of strength. So let's get into this passage. Let's unpack this a little bit and see if God can apply it to our hearts this week in whatever situation you find yourself. We see, first of all, the condition. God presents a solitary demand. What is it? It's one word in this verse. Wait. Wait upon the Lord. But what does waiting look like? What does that mean? What is it that we are supposed to be doing? I'm sure some thoughts are already coming to your minds. I see 5 characteristics of this type of waiting in this passage. Number 1, it's patient in attitude. It's patient or passive in attitude. There's a passive side of waiting. And I think we understand this. This is the waiting for something. And we all understand this. This may have been the first thought that came to your mind. We wait every day. You wait in line. You wait at the DMV. Fortunately, it's only every 5 years or whatever it is, right? The lines there are long. You wait on hold till that music is permanently ingrained in your mind and you go to sleep thinking about it that night. It's horrible, right? We understand the idea of waiting. You wait at a stoplight. There's a food truck that's come back this year, and we tried it once last year, and it must be really good because every time I drive by, the lines are like 20 and 30 deep, right? People are waiting. They're waiting for something. So we get it in the physical realm, but here now God is asking us to wait on him in the spiritual realm. And if we're honest with ourselves and with God, I think we would say that we don't like waiting on God in the spiritual realm any more than we like waiting in the physical realm. Nobody likes to wait. We get impatient waiting on God just like we do when we're waiting in line or waiting on hold. But we give it a try, and maybe we come to God and we say, okay, God, I'm waiting on you. That's what the verse says. I'm waiting. I'm still waiting. Tap our watch. All right, God, sometime today. You know, God, it's been like 3.5 minutes, and I haven't heard back. Right? And we get a little bit impatient. God, you know, I've got better things to do than sit around all day and wait. And we start to get frustrated, and then we go off our knees and we stop waiting and we go back to the daily routine and all the things that we're supposed to be doing. I can identify with that. I'm kind of wired that way. I want to do, I want to work, I want to fix, I want to be involved, I want to get something done. And to take that time and put all those things aside so that I can wait is hard. But that's precisely what this is talking about here. Sometimes the hardest thing for us to do is to do nothing, to be still and to know that He is God. But when we do, it changes our entire perspective. You see, God promises His strength, but it's on His timetable, not on ours. So what does this passive or patient side of waiting entail? Well, a lot of things came to my mind. It's sitting in His presence. It's listening to His voice. It's meditating on who He is and what He's done. It's rehearsing the ways that He is God. That's what that passage is talking about. It's tuning our hearts to His frequency, like we talked about in the song service this morning. It's coming boldly to His throne. In short, it's quality, uninterrupted time with our God. That's waiting on Him in this passive, patient sense. And maybe the first thought that comes to your mind is, okay, well, how much time do I have to take? How long do I have to wait? Well, I wish I could give you a magic formula and say, well, if you just wait 13 and a half minutes, God's going to be there and He's going to answer. And there is no magic formula for this. I can't give you a time frame. You know, on one hand, waiting in this regard is a continual state of mind, right? We should continually be in this perspective of waiting and sitting at God's feet. But there are times when activity needs to cease and we simply wait in His presence, when that's all we're doing is waiting. And so when that happens, we wait until we know or until we remember that He is God. We wait until we have the assurance that He has heard us. We wait until worry and weariness and stress have been replaced by peace and contentment and joy. That's how long we wait and sit in the presence of God. Sometimes we can wait that long. Sometimes life just has to pick up, and it's hard to do that. But I think that's the idea. We see waiting, first of all, being patient in attitude. Secondly, waiting is active in service. There's an active side of waiting. This is the waiting upon. And there's no better illustration for this than when you go to a restaurant and you sit down at a table and who comes over? Your waiter or your waitress, and they begin to serve you. And there's activity involved. At least you really hope that there's activity involved, right? A good waiter or a good waitress will be there. They'll work hard. They'll keep your drinks filled. They'll get you the things that you need. They're waiting upon you. They're serving you. So I think we can say this: while we wait patiently for our strength to renew, we actively serve God with the strength that He's already given. We don't just sit around hoarding those little bits of strength that we have left, saying, God, I'll work for you when you come and renew my strength. We're actively serving God with the strength that He's already provided. And that's illustrated with this idea, the word renew. It's very clear just with that word. The word means to make new again, to replace, to recharge. And all three of these ideas imply that strength has been expended, don't they? I mean, I don't renew something that hasn't been used. I don't replace something that hasn't worn out. I don't recharge something that hasn't been drained. So all these have the idea of effort that's been expended. The word is used in a secular way of describing a soldier that's cleaning and buffing and sharpening his sword after battle. There's no need to clean your sword or buff it or sharpen it if you haven't been out there using your sword. So that's the idea here, that it's active in service. And so while waiting begins patiently, it can't be content to sit idly by until God's strength arrives. Rather, it actively seeks to serve God, to act with its remaining strength, confident that God will fulfill His promise and that He will get there in time. Because God's never late. He's rarely early, but He is always on time. And that leads us to the third idea here that we see in waiting. Number 3 here, letter C, it's expectant in hope. There's a confident side of waiting. There's confidence involved here. And the Hebrew word again bears that out. It means to await eagerly, to hope, to expect, to look forward, to eagerly anticipate. It's the way mom waits for her daughter to come home from college at Christmas break. She got the text that says, I'm on the plane. So she knows she's on the flight, and she knows when that airplane lands at the airport that shortly after that her daughter's going to get off the plane and they're going to come around the corner. And so she's waiting eagerly, confidently, expectantly. It's how we wait for Friday when our paycheck is going to be coming. We put in the hours. We know we've put the work in. And we know that the boss is going to write the check. And when I get there at closing time, I'm going to have a check in an envelope waiting for me. That's kind of an old school thing. Does that even happen anymore? Or does it just get put directly into your account? That's living. I'm dating myself a little bit here, right? I still get paychecks, just so you know. They don't put it right in my account. Much to Peggy's chagrin. She's probably going to start lobbying for automatic. I don't know. We'll see. We wait expectantly. It's like kids at Christmas time waiting for their presents. There's a confidence, there's an expectation that there's actually going to be something in that box. Unless they're dads like me who might be playing a practical joke on them. And eventually, though, there'll still be a present. But that's how they wait, expectantly. You know, you can trace this word through the Old Testament. By the way, it'd be a great word study to take the word wait and just work your way through the Old Testament. And some don't fit this context, but many do. Let me just give you a couple. Psalm 27, verse 14. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thy heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. There's a promise, there's an expectation there. Psalm 39, verse 7. And now, Lord, what wait I for? My hope, my confidence is in thee. Psalm 40, verse 1, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. This is an interesting verse because the word for waiting is actually there twice in different forms. Waited and patiently are the same Hebrew word, just a little different form. And so David is like saying, while waiting on the Lord, I waited on the Lord. Puts those thoughts together. And by the way, when he did that, what happened? God inclined to him. He leaned in close, and God heard his cry. Psalm 52, verse 9, I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it. I will wait on thy name, for it is good. And Psalm 130, verse 5, I wait for the Lord. My soul doth wait, and in his word do I hope. In his word I have strong confidence. And friends, this is where faith enters the picture. We have confidence in his name and confidence in his word. Confidence in his timing. And so I'm serving God, expending the energy that I already had, knowing with full confidence that he's going to come and renew my strength in his time. And so I wait expectantly because of what I know about my God. I know his character. Doesn't that tie into our definition of peace? What's the second aspect of our definition of peace? Confidence in the unchanging character of God. And because of that, I can wait with expectation and with hope. I can wait expectantly also because I've seen him work on my behalf in the past. Aren't you thankful for those times, those memories when you prayed in the past and God worked in an incredible way, when God renewed your strength? You can go back to those times and reflect upon that with confidence, knowing that he has not changed and he's the same God yesterday, today, and forever. But there's a fourth aspect to this idea of waiting. And number 4 there, it's focused in direction. What does he say? They that wait upon the Lord. It's focused in direction. The focus in my situation needs to be on God, not on the reason for my weariness. How many of you struggle with this? Why is it that we're so exhausted in these times? We're focused on the situation. We're trying to fix the cause of our tiredness when really I need to be focusing on God instead. Perhaps we could say it this way, if God is to be the source of my strength, he must first be the object of my focus. And so I wait patiently and expectantly. I direct my gaze to God. And then actively and energetically, I direct my service to God. All of those play a part here. I think for me, it's another time when I can easily forget this. And in times of difficulty, I'll struggle in this area. I'll begin to focus on what I can do instead of what he's going to do. My focus needs to be upon him. You think of a Bible illustration that might come to mind in this regard, focusing on the situation instead of the Savior. I think of Peter. They're in the boat, there is a storm, they look out over the water and they get scared because they see something coming towards them, and they finally realize it's Jesus. And we can't knock Peter too much because I don't think any one of us would have started the ball rolling where he started. Lord, can I come out to you in the water? That wouldn't have been something that I would have said. Maybe you're have more faith or a little braver than I am. And Jesus said, come ahead. And so what does Peter do? He gets out of that boat and he begins to walk across the water towards his Savior, looking at his Savior. But then what happens? He hears the wind and he sees the waves and he begins to look down at the storm, and his faith fails. And as he loses his gaze on Christ, he begins to sink. But what does he do? He cries out for help. And in that crying out for help, what happens? His focus goes back on the Lord. The Lord reaches out and grabs his arm and pulls him back up. And so often in life, as we face the storms and the struggles that we go through, we look to the Lord, but then the roar of the wind and the crashing of the waves arrest our attention, and it removes our focus, our gaze from the solution to the storm. And as we're looking at the storm, we're not seeing our Savior. And just like Peter, that's when we begin to sink. That's when we begin to flounder. The key is getting our eyes back upon Christ, getting our focus back upon him. But there's a final characteristic that we see here when it comes to waiting. Our waiting, let's kind of think this through. I don't have them written down here, so I got to go on my memory. First of all, waiting is what? It's patient, or it's passive in attitude. Secondly, it's what? It's active in service. Okay. Third, it's what? Confident. There's an expectation. Then fourth, it's focused in direction. And finally, here we see that it's humble in nature. And perhaps we could say even dependent in nature. That might even be a better word. That both ideas go together here. And again, it's waiting on the Lord. It's not waiting on my strength. I've got to be humble enough. That song, that second verse taught, Lord, help me humble my pride and call on your name. To realize that we can't fix everything ourselves, that we need his strength. And so it's humble, it's dependent in nature. It's realizing our total inability to strengthen ourselves. When was the last time you faced a circumstance where you felt completely unable to go on? Like you had just reached the end. There was nothing left. You were struggling to that degree. Even in those situations, sometimes it's our pride that insists on finding a way out. But it's humility and dependence that brings us to our knees before God. And that's where he wants us to be. One of our young people made a comment towards that end in Sunday school this morning, that maybe God brings those things into our lives to cause us to humble ourselves and get on our knees before him. And he wasn't wrong. So this is humbly bowing before Almighty God and saying, God, I need your strength. God, my strength is so inadequate, but God, your strength is immeasurable. And God, I'm going to come and I'm going to rely upon you. We don't have time to go through this entire psalm. But if you were to read back through those verses, you're going to see this truth clearly communicated over and over and over again. This contrast between our incredibly powerful God and how insufficient and weak our strength really is. Let me just give you a couple of comparisons, and you can go back and check these out later. Isaiah is very clear that God's glory never fades. It's just as brilliant today as it was back when Isaiah wrote this passage. But man's glory fades like the grass without water. We hit the middle of July or the middle of August and we haven't had rain for a month. What's your grass going to start to look like if you don't give it water? Start to brown, it's going to start to fade. And he compares man to that. Man's glory fades like grass without water. God is everlasting. Man withers as a dying flower. God holds the earth in his hand. What a picture of how big and how powerful and mighty God is. And man in comparison is like a drop in the bucket. Now you know where that comes from. That's not just one of those colloquialisms. That's biblical. That's where it comes from. A lot of our little phrases that we use in our English language come from the Bible. God is the creator. Man is the creation. God is incomparably big. Man is irreducibly small. God never faints. He never gets tired. He never sleeps. Man at his best, in his prime, faints continually. Who better to go to for strength and assistance than a God who never runs out of strength? What a wonderful picture. And so when we see God for who he is and we see ourselves for who we are, we should have no trouble coming to him in humility, coming to him in dependence, and waiting upon him in that way. So that's the prerequisite. And I think if you meditated on this some more, you could probably add to this idea of what waiting is. But it's a pretty good composite of what he wants us to do. We come to him and we wait, and that waiting should be patient, yet active, expectant and focused and humble and dependent. And when we wait upon God that way, God makes a promise. He says, I shall renew your strength. Let's read through this, and I want you to count the number of times we see this little word shall. You wouldn't have had to have repeated it so many times, but he's reinforcing the certainty of the promise. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. There's certainty here. When we wait upon God this way, he promises that he will renew our strength. I believe that God's strength is tailor-made for the situations that we face in life. We read verses in the scripture that tell us that God's grace is sufficient for our needs. We've had conversations about people that are going through incredibly deep waters and how God's grace has just been incredible to them in that situation. And I've heard people say, well, I could never do what they're doing. And my answer to them is, of course you can't. You're not in their situation. You don't have God's all-sufficient grace for that specific time. God's not strengthening you for that situation like he's strengthening them. But I think we see here God's strength being tailor-made for each situation that we face. And I see 3 specific applications or times in life when God's strength can be applied. And God gives us special strength in special circumstances. Number 1, we see his strength for the testing times. This is what he says here. He says he'll give us strength to mount up with wings as eagles. I believe this is a strength that God gives when we're going through deep waters. I think this is the strength that God gives when he's passing us through the fire. Maybe it is times of death or sickness or difficulty or temptation. Maybe it's a test from God. Maybe it's an attack from Satan. Maybe it's all of the above. But these hardships, these afflictions, these trials that come into our life, and when those come, God is promising a strength to rise above, a strength to ascend, to soar above the trial, to soar with wings as eagles. I know we don't have as many eagles here in the valley as we used to have. I've heard stories from Roger and others about what it was like while the salmon were still running the river, and all the eagles that you guys would see here. I enjoy watching eagles as well. I lived in Colorado. That's where I grew up, and we had a lot of eagles there as well. My summer job in last years of high school and into college, I worked for a man in our church building fence up on his mountaintop property up on Red Mountain. He had about 240 acres, just beautiful plot of land, and 40 down below and then 200 up at the top of the mountain. And my brother and I fenced that property for them over several summers. And so we'd camp out there, perfect job for a teenager that loved to be out of town. And we'd set up camp and we'd go up there and we'd work hard all day. And then we get done with work and our hours for the day. We cook some supper and then we'd just play around on the four-wheeler or just have fun. And I remember sometimes that we would just go and we'd crest the top of the peak and we'd look down the other side into this valley that led up towards Mount Crested Butte, ski area that was over there. So a real mountainous area. And we'd sit down and we'd watch, and oftentimes the eagles would be flying around in that area. And they were just so much fun to watch. The wind currents must have been pretty spectacular in that particular area because we would watch them, and they'd just be flying around and coasting and catching a wind current. And every once in a while, you'd see when they would catch a current and it would just shoot up into the air. And I think they just liked it. I think it was fun. And it would just go and all of a sudden just take off like a fighter jet. And it would get higher and higher and higher until it got to the point where I could hardly see it. Just a little tiny speck up there in the sky. And I was watching that and I thought, if he's that small to me, I wonder what I look like to him. And then this verse came back to mind. God will allow us to soar with wings as eagles. What's that doing? It's changing our perspective. It's giving us God's perspective because we're in the middle of this trial, we're in the middle of this difficulty, and it's just enveloping us, and that's all we can see. But when we can rise above it, we can see God's perspective. And from where God sits, my trial doesn't seem so big, especially when you see how big God is, right? And so this idea of soaring and rising up with wings as eagles, I think, is giving us God's perspective, allowing us to see the problem as he does. When we face trials of such magnitude that we wonder, like Job, if God still cares, if God still loves us, we come and we wait upon him and he gives us his strength to mount up with wings as eagles, and when we do, it puts our problems in perspective. I texted Aaron this morning, and I said, I'm praying this verse for you today, brother, that God would give you the supernatural ability to rise up on eagle's wings, to really see the bigger purpose that God has here. And realize that God's bigger than your storm, as bad as your storm truly is. And we all face storms like that. And we want this kind of strength. But the way to get this kind of strength is to wait upon God. And sometimes that waiting is longer than we want it to be. Sometimes it drags out far further than we think is appropriate. And we might even have some words with God in that regard. And hopefully we come back to ourselves and we say, okay, God, you know best. God, you know best. Strength for the testing time. Secondly, he says that he will give us the strength, the ability to run and not be weary. What is that talking about? Well, in my mind, I see this as strength for the hectic times, those busy times of life, those times when we have added responsibilities, unexpected or numerous obligations. It's not a trial, it's just life has just picked up the pace. How many of you would say the last week or two you felt that here in Montana? Life is just starting to pick up the pace a little bit. There's a lot more going on. Maybe it's fair week. Maybe it's calving season if you're on a ranch. Maybe it's holiday season. Maybe in school you've got a big test or a big project. Maybe there's a deadline at work that's coming up. Maybe there's a job you need to finish before the snow flies. We're not quite there yet, but that's going to come when fall hits, right? It's what mom does when she finds out that dad invited the boss over to dinner and he's going to be there in like 15 minutes and the house is a mess. And so she's like, she's like a movie on fast forward running through the house trying to get everything cleaned up, right? The hectic times. And if you happen to be in her way, she's going to employ you and get you busy doing it as well, right? Sometimes we face times like this and it leaves us gasping for breath and exhausted. Sometimes we feel like we just ran a 4-minute mile. We've got a 5-minute break and we've got to run another one. And it's just one after another. And yet God promises strength during these times that's tailor-made to fit your needs. A strength to run and not be weary. Now that doesn't mean a strength to run and not get tired. That's not the promise here. It's the idea that we have the ability to continue running through the tired, to not quit, to not give up. God will sustain us through those hectic times and give us everything we need to accomplish what he wants us to accomplish. Have you ever considered that maybe these hectic times may actually be good gifts from a loving God that force us to rely upon him in a deeper way? I think so. Which aspect of waiting will you struggle with most during the hectic times? I know which one I struggle with. The idea of waiting patiently and waiting passively. Because there's nothing harder than sitting still when you see a list that's a mile long that all has to be done. And to sit and wait in God's presence till you hear his voice, till you know that he's heard you, till you know that he is God. That's a discipline that we have to learn. But when we do that, the rest of our day is going to go much better. So wait passively and patiently, even in the hectic times. Put him to the test. Wait on him that way. And watch what he does in your life. Watch how he enables you to run and not be weary. But we see a third aspect here, a third time that I think God gives us a special tailor-made strength. He says at the end of verse 31, they shall walk and not faint. What is this for? Well, in my mind, again, I see this as strength for the daily grind. Strength for the routine. Strength for the monotonous, the repetitious, the tedious, the things that we just do day in and day out. If you're a young person here today, maybe it's you get up in the morning, your alarm clock goes off. All right, I'm just gonna ask, how many young people are just, I get up as soon as my alarm clock goes off? Put your hand up. How many of you guys you hit the snooze at least once or twice or 3 or 4 times? Okay, just seeing. Snooze, who needs an alarm clock? Some of you guys are wired that way. I was a lot better disciplined. I get up now because if I don't get up, I'll just keep sleeping. So I've got to get up when that alarm goes. But the alarm clock goes off, kids, and so you get up and you get breakfast and you grab your stuff and you go to school, right? And you spend all day at school and you get done with that, and maybe you got sports practice and you get done with that, and so you come home and you do your homework and you do your chores, and then you have supper, and then you go to bed, and then the next morning it starts all over again. That's your routine. Dads, you have a similar routine. You get up and you go to work, and whatever your work day entails, and then you come home, and then you get some supper, and then there may be some honeydews. There's things to fix. There's responsibilities. There's yards to mow. There's things that have to be done, and so you work and you do all those things. Then you go to bed and you start the next day all over again. I think of moms, the cleaning and the cooking, and if you've got little ones at home, the changing and the laundry and all the stuff that's got to be done. Maybe there's weeding the garden, and maybe you're homeschooling the kids, and that's your routine. And day in and day out, you do. The next morning, it starts all over again. I think this may be the hardest area for all of us. Have you ever stopped and just said to yourself, it's just daily, everyday life. Why am I so tired? I mean, there's nothing hectic going on. It's just the normal busy, the normal hectic. There's no huge trial in my life. Why am I so exhausted right now? I think part of it is this: we gear up for the trials, don't we? We anticipate the hectic times, and we'll come to God and we'll wait on him in those situations because we know that we need his help. But we don't think about it the same way in our day-to-day routines. We're like, I've been doing this my whole life, man. Why do I need to go to God in prayer for this? And so we fail to wait upon God. And in the day-to-day, if we don't wait upon him, he doesn't renew our strength, and we find ourselves doing life in our own strength. Newsflash, we need God in our day-to-day lives, just like we need him in the hectic times and just like we need him in the trials. If you're living life this way and you're not waiting on him in the day-to-day, it's like taking a power strip with everything plugged into it and taking the cord, and instead of plugging it into the socket, you're plugging it back into itself. And then you're wondering why the lamp won't turn on. And you're wondering why the battery on your phone isn't charging. Well, it's not rocket surgery, to quote a good friend of mine. You're not plugged into the outlet. You're not waiting upon the Lord. You're not doing what God wants us to do. And it's hard in the day-to-day because we're just in a routine and we're so used to doing it. We think we can handle this. But no, God says you can't. I think in all of these three areas, this is the most vital. We've got to learn to wait on God for strength in the day-to-day routine. And that's going to build a habit that will serve you well during the hectic times and serve you well when the trials of life come your way. Oh, when we wait on God in our day-to-day life, our everyday routine, God promises us strength that enables us to walk and not faint, not get tired in the day-to-day grind. I don't know where you're at today. I don't know what you're facing. I don't know the need in your life for God's strength. I don't know if you're going through an intense trial or a difficulty. Maybe you find yourself in one of those hectic, busy seasons where it's just frantic and the pace is really, really fast. Maybe for you, it's just the grind of daily life and it started to take its toll. You know, when I was younger, this is actually one of the first passages that I ever developed into a sermon. There's a long story that goes with that. I'm not going to take the time to necessarily share it right now, but I was early years of college and worked through that. And as I was working through this passage, the main thrust to me was physical strength in the face of exhausting circumstances. It was all physically focused. That's where my needs were at that point. I had waning strength and I had an ever-growing to-do list, right? Not getting much sleep. There's so much to get done with the projects. I was actually visiting Diane's family. I don't even know if we were engaged at that point yet, or if we were still just dating. And we were in church that Sunday morning, and I'd been working on a message for one of my classes, fortunately, and I had it with me for homework. I was working on it. But he introduced me and welcomed me to church. He says, and by the way, come back tonight because Mark's going to be preaching the Sunday night service. I'm like, no, I'm not. And I said that out loud, and he goes, yes, you are. I don't know what he'd have done if I hadn't showed up, but I spent all afternoon instead of getting my nap that I really felt like I needed working on a message, and I preached this passage that night. But it was all physical to me. But I've come to realize through the years as I've gotten older, as God has matured me, that there are many times the need for strength goes far beyond the physical, doesn't it? Times where the exhaustion is due to much more than just an expenditure of energy and physical work. There's times that it's a bone weariness that's more emotional and spiritual than it is physical. A type of tired that goes far beyond what a good night's sleep can cure. The weariness we feel when the kids are struggling. Maybe what you feel when a spouse or another family member is hurting deeply. When the burdens that we carry seem insurmountable. It's a different level. But friends, God's strength is just as valuable and sufficient in those situations as it is when we're young and it's just we're physically exhausted. You know, the older we get, it seems the greater the loads we carry, the deeper the exhaustion. But here's the point. The promises in this passage apply to the youth, those whose struggles are more physical exhaustion and weariness. But it also applies to those who are going through times of emotional or spiritual exhaustion as well. Guys, when we feel completely wrung out, like we have nothing else to give, it applies to us too. When we're hanging there by a leg and a broken arm, God's strength is sufficient for us in that point. It's tailor-made for whatever type of weariness you're facing today. The question is, will you wait upon him? Will you follow the prerequisite in order to get that strength? Will you wait patiently and actively, expectantly, with focus, with humility and dependence? As you do, God will begin to renew your strength. He'll allow you to mount up with wings as eagles, to run and not be weary, and he'll enable you to walk the day-to-day life without fainting. When we fulfill the demand, he fulfills the promise. I shall. Let's say this verse as we close, just out loud, all together. I think we know it. Ready? Let's go. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And I'm just going to echo that song. Lord, teach us to wait.